looks like our streaming services are going live. We should be live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Periscope, and Facebook. I just saw the update go out via LinkedIn. So Zeb, really appreciate you joining me for this. We've got Zeb Evans at ClickUp, CEO and founder. We're going to be talking about kind of the future of work post-pandemic. Zeb, if you give your quick intro and background, I'd really appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Zeb, CEO at ClickUp. ClickUp is a workplace productivity platform where you can put all of your work in one place. So instead of having separate applications for things like project management software, docs, goals, chat, you have all of those things in one place that are very flexible and customizable to the way that you work instead of having an opinion about how you work. As far as myself, I've been an entrepreneur since I was born. Since I was like 3 or 4 years old, I was always that kid that was selling things and trying to create some type of hustle pretty much every year of my life. And now we are joining James in sunny San Diego.
Awesome. Well, it's always great to have not just founders that are doing great things, but also, we both share a lot of similarities in kind of our upbringing and the fact that we both had the entrepreneurial spirit from, single digit age. So really stoked to be here with you. So yeah, today we're talking about future of work, and I wanted to get your feedback and just have a collaborative conversation about kind of what we're going to be doing when it's okay to come back to the office. Now, pre-pandemic, I was a really big believer in having my team under one roof because of the collaboration that happens in the office. And, what the pandemic has taught me and the Rapify team is it is actually possible to be fully virtual. And while there are, pros and cons to that, I'd love to get your feedback on the last year at ClickUp and what you've learned.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'll start with that. We have always been a little bit flexible with remote work. Obviously, have become very flexible with remote work now. I did, and I still believe that better collaboration can happen in person in certain areas, but you don't always need that collaboration in every role. There's certain roles for us, like engineering, that we find that people are generally more productive on their own for the most part. And then there's other roles like creative functions that are kind of the opposite. Those people indicate that they do want to come back into the office, and it's hard to lose that real whiteboard feel of ideation, of creation remotely or over Zoom. So prior to pandemic, we were about 50% remote as a company. Certainly always had a headquarters, and when you were at that headquarters location, you're generally expected to come into the office. So yeah, we're definitely changing that now, and I think that most companies will become more flexible as they go.
Yeah, I don't know if this is similar, but when we first raised our first priced round, we ended up building out a small office suite in Solana Beach, and I actually physically was like demoing a building and designing the way the place is going to be, laid out. And there was a little bit of, pride in the fact that I built this workplace that I wanted to have our employees come and not only enjoy being at, but also collaborate. And part of that, I'd say I held on to a little piece of that at the very beginning of the pandemic. I was kind of like, man, we spent all this time and effort and money getting this building built out so that we can put our best foot forward and really, crush our goals as a company. And, one of the things I have seen, specifically on the engineering front, is there actually has been an increase in productivity with the engineers because they're not spending time commuting into the office, and they're able to stay heads down and not have that interruption in workflow. I'm curious, did you see different departments excel with this kind of more virtualized environment? And then conversely, did you see other departments not really latch onto it as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'll say it's really hard to measure productivity. I mean, we're a productivity company, but it's still very hard to measure. The best indications of productivity are what employees tell you, qualitatively, kind of how they're feeling. And I do think that everybody's different. So even regardless of department, and when you break it down, even when you can generalize and say, engineering mostly work better remotely. There are lots of people that are forthcoming that they don't like to work remotely, or they don't work better remotely. They like to have a separate place that they can go, and that could be from a variety of things. Like maybe they have a family at home that's very kind of bothersome to their workflows, or like young kids, or it could be something as simple as they're not liking their working environment where they are, wanting to get out of the house. And then the other thing obviously is that connection that some people really, really value. So I think it is hard to say departmental wise, but you can make some generalizations. And so things like creative and marketing, we've in product even, we found that you certainly can get the work done, but you lose a lot of that knowledge sharing. You lose a lot of that creativity. We always preach to use public channels, or at least private channels in Slack for everything, rather than direct messages, because that way, that's the only way you're going to have knowledge sharing. Otherwise, you have these one-off conversations that nobody hears. Whereas, you normally at an office location would be able to hear things and jump in, and there is a lot more ideation and knowledge sharing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm a very tactile person when it comes to working on something creative, and I'm a marketer at heart. That's really my background. So when, we're working on a creative project, a campaign, doing any sort of creative, you almost have this like game of telephone that's added when you do have those siloed conversations, when you do have the private channels. And I've actually, fallen victim to sending out a direct message to somebody and then just kind of hoping they share with the rest of the team, and then realizing I really should have put that in a more public channel so I didn't have to repeat myself. But I also see, another thing, and that is, like the being able to tap on somebody's shoulder and just talk to them real quick, or have a sidebar conversation. It's not the same when you're in the office versus being fully remote. There's more of a it feels more like you have to plan or get people all to like click on the Zoom or get into that Zoom meeting. And so you lose that. And sometimes there's that nugget of value that's time limited that you really need to just talk about right now. And so, I think, from a creative standpoint, not having everybody under one roof has been more of an adjustment than I'd say than a catalyst. But speaking of catalysts, I think without the pandemic, this would have been a really hard movement to get everybody to accelerate to, right? Because now what ended up happening at Rapify is it kind of tightened the team, because everybody understood that like there's a global pandemic. We have to be really tight. We have to, focus on doing what we're doing, because this is a challenging time for a lot of folks in the space that we operate in. So I think that catalyst and creating this like virtual environment kind of had to happen. One by itself, I think just going fully virtual without the pandemic or some sort of environmental factor kind of pushing it would have been really difficult. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it just wouldn't be generally accepted by most companies to go remote. That was, I think, the preconceived notion before the pandemic. And so it would be hard to get companies to flex to just do that all of a sudden. So I think that certainly like forced companies to think a little bit differently, especially in their approaches to getting back to what is going to be normal in the future. But I mean, like I think I do generally agree that there's a huge difference between working remotely and having a connection in person. Now, whether that connection in person needs to be every day is certainly something to be debated, and I don't think it needs to be every day. But everybody, that we've onboarded during the pandemic that we haven't met in person, you try everything you can, right, to build culture, to have connection. But that stuff isn't replicated outside of being in person. So we do think that, whether there's a cadence of quarterly or even bi-yearly, something like that, meeting in person is very, very important to us still.
Yeah, there have been a handful of concepts and other founders kind of sharing what they're doing with their companies. One of the concepts that I thought would be interesting to talk about with you is this 3-2-2 concept. It was three days remote, 2 days in the office, 2 days off. I think it could work. And I think that kind of one of the things that's interesting to me about it is when you're in the office, you now have a real purpose to use the time that you're there with those people. It almost makes it more important. And so I'm curious, like, is that a concept that you think ClickUp might adopt, or is there some variant of that you think might be interesting in your organization?
Yeah, for sure. Not that one exactly, but we had already thought about how remote work would be affected via in-office life when pandemic was over, or when people wanted to return to work. And our perspective was trying to get people on the same teams in the office at the same time. So general guidelines and saying, hey, if you're on this team, if you're on the marketing team, marketing department, your days in office are Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? Or Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or whatever works well for that team. And so generally we're going to allow those teams to decide what they want to do, whether that's 2 days, 3 days, and which days work best for each department or team. But for us, there'll still be guidelines. I think they're not going to be necessarily rules. And at least that allows, when you to come into the office, you're not going in there and nobody's there that you're working with. And therefore there really isn't much of a point or benefit to being with people other than that culture connection.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, just mandating that they're in the office for a specific set number of days per week, but then they come in to basically be on Zoom with their team, that doesn't really make any sense. Like having the whiteboard discussion in person with the team, that's the whole purpose, right? Having that tactile component that, you can't really replicate with Zoom by itself. Now, you guys are growing super fast, and you've obviously raised venture capital to help spearhead that growth and maintain the market position that you guys have. How does growth and this environment, how do those two things balance each other out, and how are you approaching it?
Yeah, there's benefits and downsides to everything, and so with this in particular, I mean, we're definitely able to hire more people, more kind of diverse areas and backgrounds, because we're not requiring in-person work. Generally, we were open to that before, but certain roles we were hiring only in San Diego, and so we've expanded that. Roles like customer service can be worldwide now. And so I think that you get some benefits like that. And then on the downsides, it's the stuff that we've kind of talked about, right? You miss out on that connection, you miss out on that culture. When you're growing really fast, there's supposed to be this buzz in the office, right? This kind of like high of that growth around you. And it is hard to replicate that remotely. It really is. When you talk to people that we're at, some of the fastest growing companies like Dropbox and Airbnb in the early days, their office felt like, a unicorn office, right? Where everybody was really on this level of passion and happiness, and really just motivation. And I think we still have that for the most part, especially, the people that were early on, but it's just not the same when everybody else isn't around you and you're seeing it at the same time. You can have celebrations, we can have meetings, we have, one-on-ones, you can do all of that connection stuff remotely, and we do. But it still fundamentally is different. I think you lose a lot of personality from an individual when you're remote. And I think that part is hard to develop, that personality connection with each other.
Yeah, I'm one of my biggest worries is that losing control of culture, and basically we've been at this for 6 years now, and we've established a culture at Rapify, and we're also growing. And so, being able to maintain and keep the quality of that culture up without being able to be there in person has been something that I've been trying to to figure out. And I think one of the, there are a handful of tools that we've implemented to kind of help with that. One of them is an interesting tool called Trainual. I don't know if you're familiar with Trainual, but basically allows you to create modules, like learning modules for each one of the, each one, like if I wanted to create like a background on Rapify, so that when you join the team, you could really understand where we came from and where we're going, as well as, being able to learn about specific aspects of our products and almost create like a course so that when they're onboarded, it can be done virtually. That was one of the things we started to implement pre-pandemic. And I think that type of approach, I think, is going to be really, really important, post-pandemic. So I'm curious, like, I'm sure you obviously use your own platform and other tools to help with that, but I'm curious, like, how has your onboarding changed, since then?
We've added a lot to onboarding just as we've grown in general. And so some of that stuff I think would have been added regardless of this, but things that we have added are things like coffee breaks. When you're starting coffee breaks, where it's like kind of like a water cooler talk where, are replicating, where you'd go get a cup of coffee or go get a glass of water in an office. We've tried to replicate that stuff. We certainly have a culture presentation that's about an hour and a half that I do with core values. My COO does one as well. And then, generally what we've done is break teams into smaller pods where you can have a better connection with a few people rather than through the whole company, and making sure that the people that are leading those pods have been with us for a while and can really portray what the company is and what the culture here is and what our mission statement is and how we're all just super passionate about saving people time and making people more productive. And so that part of it, I think, is pretty well replicated. But there's always more that you can try to do, and we have tried to do certain things that don't necessarily work. Things that do work also. We've also started things like meditation, mindfulness stuff. We'll have guided meditations or yoga sessions, things like that during the day, which they're a great break to the day. But I can't say for sure that it's just remote work that would have done that. I think in the office we probably would have had similar stuff also. So again, I think the big theme is that there are some things that you can replicate, and there are some things that can be better or more productive outside of the office and remote. But it really is just hard to replicate that connection. And so to get there, I think you do have to have some form of being in person on an occasion.
Yeah, one of the things I kind of wish we implemented earlier on that has been super valuable is, every week, every Tuesday morning, we have our all hands meeting, and we're a much smaller organization than ClickUp, so we could do that every week. But every week we have an all hands. We go through each one of the different departments, what we're trying to accomplish this week. We also have a Slack channel called Weekly Top 5, where everybody basically shares what their top five things they're trying to accomplish this week. And it creates kind of like memorializes what they're working on in that given week. And in that breakout or in that Zoom meeting that we do every week, we started implementing breakouts. So every 2 weeks, we make it so that everybody gets broken up at random into groups of 3 or 4, where they're able to actually have that kind of water cooler style conversation. And sometimes we have a theme where we have them talk about a specific topic. And sometimes it's just simply, some departments just won't talk to each other, every week. Our ops folks don't talk to our sales folks every single week. Our engineers don't necessarily talk to our sales folks or our ops folks, every single week. So the feedback I've received from my team has been pretty amazing, and it's also really tightened up the team. When we get out of those breakouts, everybody's super chipper, really like smiling. You could tell like it kind of injected a bunch of energy into the org. So that was like just a learning that I kind of wish we just did before, because we do have a dispersed team. Even before pandemic, we have folks all over the country that work for Rapify. So it's been that was just a simple tidbit where you enable breakouts in Zoom, and it's a really cool tool. So I don't know, I'm curious, like, have you implemented anything in your virtual meetings with your greater team that really help?
Yeah, there's, we've always done weekly all hands meetings. And so that is the time where every single team member is expected to be there. And that's a great way for us to start that connection. There's chat, and we have experiment. We're doing some breakout rooms where people can connect in a little bit more tight knit way rather than the whole company, because it's really hard to do that. And then, of course, when we onboard new employees, every cohort that gets onboarded every week kind of is their own kind of team, right? Their own little bubble, connected to all of the other bubbles. And those teams have a lot of cross collaboration and communication with each other, and they're not necessarily the same department, right? The same team. So you can kind of break down those barriers, because you're right. You kind of bring up a good point about, you can start, even in office, by the way, you can have a huge barriers between certain departments. And that is not only, not great culturally and not great for connection, but it's also not great for the business and product and development. When you have too many silos that can't be broken down, then you start to have downstream issues with that. And so we've always been very focused on not having those silos, and having a hyper kind of communication and collaboration with each department, regardless of where you are.
Now, leading up to this LinkedIn Live session, I saw Marco Zappacosta at Thumbtack. He actually launched an article on his LinkedIn about what Thumbtack is going to be doing, and I thought it was really interesting, because it's kind of taking the 3-2-2 concept to like a completely, to me, a totally different level, where they are creating these Thumbtack camps, and they're basically places you could go to work virtually, as well as be able to have those group meetings. And there's structure to it, but it's not, it's not 3-2-2. It's not as rigid as like a 3-2-2. So, it's really interesting to see all of these different, especially unicorn founders, create these concepts that are really interesting. But the camp Thumbtack was super interesting to me. I don't know. Do you have a chance, or do you have any thoughts on that approach?
I mean, look, I love it personally. I am a big fan of new places, new stimulation. When you start getting tired or start kind of becoming complacent, if you go somewhere, you'll immediately change that. At least myself, I love traveling. I love moving around, even if it's like moving from one place in my apartment building to another place, or moving from one coffee shop to another every couple hours. Like, you get that new stimulation, that new energy, a new vibe. So I generally love that concept. I'm interested to see how it becomes executed. But we've always had people in our company that were kind of digital nomads, and so that takes that to the next level. Where you're really going to different countries, traveling. And so, I think that in the post-pandemic world, I think it's a really cool idea. And I again am a firm believer in having people at least connect with each other in certain cadences, and that makes it a little bit more random, but you do have those cadences there, and I think that's super important for a company, especially as you're starting out.
Yeah, I think it's a novel concept. And also, I've also started to see founders talking about planning more of these like field trip style events quarterly or annually, where basically you're getting your team to go to specific locations. And I think it's an interesting way to be able to get not only your team fired up about going to a new place, or a place they might not have ever really considered going, but it also gives them, you could also create an agenda where there is team building, where there is collaboration, and it gives you purpose for being there. And that's something I'm actually really excited about, like being able to have, maybe we meet in the middle of the country somewhere, and we do something for a week, where it's a Rapify, it's a Rapify field trip, if you will. So kind of adopting that summer camp, or that remote digital nomad approach is pretty interesting to me. Now we've got some questions flowing through. If you're watching on LinkedIn, definitely post your questions in the comment section on the live stream. The first one that came through was from my head of business development. He says, as both of us have agreed that remote work is an aspect that is here to stay, what do you think will be the next big focus for companies to make it more efficient, enjoyable, and manageable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a ton of things that you can try to do. Things that we've talked about, things like coffee breaks, those frequently or at least consistent basis, every monthly, quarterly, whatever it may be, bi-yearly connection with people. We also, I think when you start doing random, mindfulness trainings or meditation things, or even some of our teams do things like movie nights virtually. They'll do like game nights virtually. There's a lot of those things that you can still do virtually now. So if you don't have the opportunity to work in person, I think there's still a lot of fun things that you can do. And there's some great entrepreneurs that have created some opportunity for creating those activities online now.
Yeah, they're not just the platforms that we have access to that enable this, but I mean, the environment and just the understanding that this is kind of what we have to do. And we're now used to it. It takes, I think the science behind it, a habit is, I think it takes 22 or 24 days to create a habit. And we've been doing this now for like 400 days. So, it's here to stay. It's something that we're going to continue to see happen. Just like a lot of folks have been kind of forced to leverage app-enabled food and grocery delivery, like folks that maybe didn't use Uber Eats or DoorDash or Instacart as much in the past. Now it's become kind of normal for the vast majority of Americans. So I see that persisting post-pandemic as well. We had another comment or another question come through. It looks like some folks hopped into the stream a little late asking about what 322 is. 322 is a work concept that basically implies that you're remote 3 days out of the week, you're in the office 2 days out of the week, and you are off 2 days out of the week. So 322, that is the concept. Another interesting kind of question for specific to you, Zeb. You moved ClickUp from San Francisco to San Diego right before basically all of this kind of went down. Yeah. Do you think that actually kind of helped prime the pump for the next iteration of work for ClickUp?
I mean, in some ways, we were, even in San Francisco, we were a little bit remote. We were still probably 50% remote, and we were much smaller back then. But still today, we're about 50% right now. Even and I'm talking just outside of San Diego, assuming that we all went back to the office. So I think it's from the beginning, we've been very connected using our own tool, using ClickUp, and so it hasn't really been much of a determining factor on us on like whether or not we can get things done or whether or not we can stay connected. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll say, like, outside of that is we certainly moved at a great time to get out of the Bay Area, and I think we're very happy that we made the decision to move down here.
Yeah, it's really, really tough to beat San Diego. Before, if we see any other Q&A pop through, we can answer them. But I think the other, one of the questions I had for you was how can ClickUp give companies an advantage in the future of work? I mean, obviously there's an obvious correlation to your product and virtual work in general, but I'd love to get, the CEO's take on how you think ClickUp as a product can really help be a catalyst to that.
Yeah, I mean, in remote work, this is exacerbated, but in all work, it's really hard having a source of truth. Like, where is work, right? What do I know? What am I working on next? What is Susan doing next? What is John doing next? Where are our priorities, right? What did these people do last week? Like, all of those questions are very hard to answer. And those are the questions that we solve. So with remote work, it's, in person, you might be able to have more of a collaboration and know exactly what people are working on if you're in a pod, but we still have seen that problem even in person. With remote, it's very much so exacerbated. You can try doing daily stand-ups and things like that, But we found those things to be kind of just a more like a checkbox rather than actually being helpful for people. And so again, I think the biggest advantage of using ClickUp is knowing that all of your work is in one place. You know where to find work, you know what other people are working on, and you certainly know the priority of work. You don't have to have resource managers going around and telling everybody, this is what you need to do next, this is next, this is next, what are you working on, what are you bugging people. It is much more of a streamlined kind of flow and this zen concept to how work should be.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's definitely a product that we want to implement at Rapify. It's actually in the priorities for things to implement in Q3. We saw another quick question that popped through from Alec. He says, what are your professional learning moments in 2020? I mean, I'll kick this one off. I've seen, well, I mean, I learned probably more in the last year than probably any year that came before it, just in terms of just who I am, pain tolerance, ability to solve problems, and just anything every business challenge that has ever kind of come before 2020 is kind of not even is a kind of a moot point. So, I mean, I think my biggest professional learning moment in 2020 is there's always a way. You can't give up. If you give up, that's when you succumb to failure. So I think it's more of a reinforcement than a learning. I'm curious, Zeb, did you learn anything specific in 2020 that 2020 brought to light?
I mean, look, I think that I personally learned that the world is very fragile, and that there are things that are just going to become unexpected that blindside you, and you do have to going along with what you said. You're rolling with the punches. You're just figuring things out as you go. In some ways, it's impossible to predict the future, and it's impossible to predict things like this, and it's impossible to know when government changes certain guidelines arbitrarily. You're never going to be able to predict that stuff. So you do just have to be very flexible. And so I think that theme of being flexible, that theme of being reactive and being quick to be reactive carries you well, not only in like a 2020 world, but in everywhere. And I think that is one of our huge learnings is, you can't sit around and wait for office work to come back or wait for something to bounce back to be in a normal state. You're always being reactive in what you're doing. And I think that serves you well, again, outside of, the 2020 world also.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was probably the biggest one is you learn how fast the world really can change and the implications behind such a drastic and radical change. Well, I think, we're coming up on time. I don't want to belabor this live stream. I really do appreciate your time. Do you have any closing remarks or anything else you wanted to add before we hop off?
No, I mean, I think we covered everything. I think one other thing that I will say, I think we learned in 2020 that carries us elsewhere is that nobody really knows what they're doing. Right. So from the outside, you think that large companies, you think that these people that have created these massive entities, massive organizations really knew what they were doing the whole time. And they don't. The reality is nobody really knows what they're doing. Everybody's figuring it out on a day-to-day basis. So when you live life and business that way, I think you become a lot less stressed and you have a lot less anxiety. Every decision isn't as important as you think it is. And it does all end up working out.
Totally. Well, Zeb, it was a pleasure. I really appreciate the time. I'm going to end the live stream now. It takes typically about 10 seconds, so just stay on for a moment.